The quality of mercy
is not strained.
Well, actually, we're going to find out if it's strained tonight.
Was the verdict rendered to Shylock fair, or was it strained?
But before we get to the trial itself, we'd like to take a moment to just thank all of you for coming to our second mock trial. Thank you so much for coming. And we'd like to thank UCI Law and the School of Humanities and the Claire Trevor School of the Arts as well for their support with this endeavor. We wouldn't be here doing all of this without your support. So thank you all very much.
We also want to take a moment to thank Chancellor Howard Gilman. The Chancellor founded Illuminations, which is our campus arts and culture initiative and a major sponsor of tonight's event. So thank you, Chancellor.
And we'd also like to thank our EVC and Provost Enrique Lavernia for his ongoing support of all things Shakespearean on our campus. Thank you so much.
And Dean of Humanities, Tyrus Miller.
And the Dean of the Claire Trevor School of the Arts, Stephen Barker. Thank you so much for your support.
We're really grateful to everyone here for supporting our Shakespearean adventures at UCI. UC Irvine is the only UC campus that has its own annual Shakespeare Festival and Shakespeare Center. And we're really happy to be able to announce tonight that we are reorganizing as the New Swan Shakespeare Center, thanks to the support of many parties in the first two rows and all of you who have been interested in matters Shakespearean for the last 10 years at UCI.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to take a moment to talk through the story of the Merchant of Venice. For those of you that don't know the story, or for those of you that might like a little reminder, we're going to focus on the action up until the trial scene, because all of the action after the trial scene isn't relevant to the trial itself.
So Shylock is a moneylender who lives in the Jewish ghetto in Venice. He is vilified by the Venetian Christians who spit on him, call him a dog, and humiliate him on a daily basis.
One of these racist Venetians is Antonio, and he's the actual merchant of the play's title. Antonio has promised to lend 3,000 ducats to his friend Bassanio so that Bassanio can woo a beautiful heiress named Portia. However, all of Antonio's ships are at sea, and he doesn't have the sum to lend Bassanio.
So they ask Shylock, the Jewish moneylender, for a loan of 3,000 ducats. Shylock agrees to the loan, but makes a condition. It must be repaid in 3 months, or the penalty is a pound of Shylock's flesh.
Of Antonio's.
I'm sorry, of Antonio's flesh.
That's a different story.
That's a very different story. They agree to these terms, the correct terms.
Okay, meanwhile, Antonio's ships have been wrecked, and he is pressed to repay his debt.
In court, the date for repayment has passed, and Shylock demands his pound of flesh. He is offered more than the amount due, but Shylock, infuriated by the loss of his daughter and years of humiliation, is intent on having justice served. The Duchess refuses to intervene, and Portia arrives disguised as a man.
And that's about all we need to tell you before we present for you a portion, I would say an edited portion of the trial scene from last summer's The Merchant of Venice at New Swan Shakespeare Festival. So I'd like at this point to introduce to you 4 of our New Swan Shakespeare Festival actors. Okay, so from your right to left, this is Hope Andrejak. She will be playing Portia. This is Sean Spann, he will be playing Antonio. And Maya Smoot will be playing the Duchess. And Greg Unger will be playing Shylock.
What? Is Antonio here?
Ready. So please, your grace.
I am sorry for thee. Thou art come to answer a stony adversary, an inhuman wretch, incapable of pity, void and empty from any dram of mercy.
I have heard your grace hath ta'en great pains to qualify his rigorous course. But since he stands obdurate, and that no lawful means can carry me out of his envy's reach, I do oppose my patience to his fury, and am armed to suffer with quietness of spirit the very tyranny and rage of his.
Make room, and let him stand before our face. Shylock, the world thinks, and I think so too, that thou but leadst this fashion of thy malice to the last hour of act. And then 'tis thought thou show thy mercy and remorse more strange than is thy strange apparent cruelty. And where thou now exacts the penalty, which is a pound of this poor merchant's flesh, thou wilt not only loose the forfeiture, but touched with human gentleness and love, forgive a moiety of the principal, glancing an eye of pity on his losses that have of late so huddled on his back, and now to press a royal merchant down and pluck commiseration of estate from brassy bosoms and rough hearts of flint, from stubborn Turks and Tartars, never trained to offices of tender courtesy. We all expect a gentle answer, Jew.
I have possessed your grace of what I purpose, and by our holy Sabbath have I sworn to have the due and forfeit of my bond. If you deny me, let the danger light upon your charter and your city's freedom. You will ask me why I rather choose to have a weight of carrion flesh than to receive 3,000 ducats. I'll not answer that. But say it is my humor. Are you answered? What if my house be troubled by a rat, and I be pleased to give 10,000 ducats to have it banned? Are you answered? Some men there are love not a gaping pig, some that are mad when they behold a cat, and others, when the bagpipe sings in the nose, cannot contain their urine. For affection, mistress of passion, sways it to the mood of what it likes or loathes. Now, for your answer. As there is no firm reason to be rendered why he cannot abide a gaping pig, why he a harmless necessary cat, why he a woolen bagpipe, so can I give no reason, nor I will not, more than a lodged hate and certain loathing I bear Antonio, that I follow thus a losing suit against him. Are you answered?
I pray you, think you question with the Jew. You may as well go stand upon the beach and bid the main flood bait its usual height. You may as well use question with the wolf, why he hath made the ewe bleat for the lamb. You may as well forbid the mountain pines to wag their high tops and to make no noise when fretting with the gusts of heaven. You may as well do anything most hard as seek to soften that, than which, what's harder, his Jewish heart. Therefore, I beseech you, make no more offers, use no farther means, but with all brief and plain conveniency, let me have judgment, and the Jew his will.
How shalt thou hope for mercy, rendering none?
What judgment shall I dread, doing no wrong? You have among you many a purchased slave. which like your asses and mules and dogs you use in abject and slavish parts, because you bought them. Shall I say to you, let them be free? Marry them to your heirs. Why sweat they under burdens? Let their beds be made as soft as yours, and let their palates be seasoned with such viands. You will answer, the slaves are ours. So do I answer you. The pound of flesh which I demand of him is dearly bought. 'Tis mine, and I will have it. If you deny me, fie upon your law. There is no force in the decrees of Venice. I stand for judgment. Answer, shall I have it?
The esteemed Bellario doth commend a young and learned doctor to our court. And here I take it is the doctor come. Come you from old Bellario?
I did, my lord.
You are welcome. Take your place. Are you acquainted with the difference that holds this present question in the court?
I am informed thoroughly of the cause. Which is the merchant here, and which the Jew?
Antonio and old Shylock both stand forth.
Is your name Shylock?
Shylock is my name.
Of a strange nature is the suit you follow, yet in such a rule that the Venetian law cannot impugn you as you do proceed. You stand within his danger, do you not?
Aye, so he says.
Do you confess the bond?
I do.
Then must the Jew be merciful?
My deeds upon my head, I crave the law, the penalty and forfeit of my bond.
Is he not able to discharge the money?
Yes. Here I tender it for him in the court, yea, twice the sum. If that will not suffice, it must appear that malice bears down truth. And I beseech you, rest once the law to your authority, to do a great right, do a little wrong, and curb this cruel devil of his will.
It must not be. There is no power in Venice can alter a decree establish it. It will be recorded for a precedent. Many an error by the same example will rush into the state. It cannot be.
A Daniel come to judgment, yea, a Daniel, O wise young judge, how I do honor thee.
I pray thee let me look upon the bond.
Here it is, most reverend doctor, here it is.
Shylock, there's thrice thy money offered thee.
An oath, an oath, I have an oath in heaven. Shall I say lay perjury upon my soul? No, not for Venice.
Why, this bond is forfeit. And lawfully by this the Jew may claim a pound of flesh to be by him cut off nearest the merchant's heart. Be merciful. Take thrice thy money, bid me tear the bond.
When it is paid according to the tenor. It doth appear you are a worthy judge. You know the law. Your exposition hath been most sound. I charge you by the law, whereof you are a well-deserving pillar, proceed to judgment. By my soul I swear, there is no power in the tongue of man to alter me. I stay here on my bond.
Most heartily I do beseech the court to give the judgment.
Why then thus it is. You must prepare your bosom for his knife.
Most rightful judge, O excellent young man.
For the intent and purpose of the law hath full relation, which here appeareth due upon the bond.
'Tis right, O wise and upright judge, how much more elder art thou than thy looks.
Therefore lay bare your bosom.
Aye, his breast. So says the bond. Doth it not, noble judge? Nearest his heart. Those are the very words.
It is so. Are there balance here to weigh the flesh?
I have them ready.
Have by some surgeon, Shylock, on your charge, to stop his wounds, lest he do bleed to death.
Is it so nominated in the bond?
It is not so expressed. But what of that? 'Twere good you do so much for charity.
I cannot find it. 'Tis not in the bond.
You merchant, have you anything to say?
But little. I am armed and well prepared.
We trifle time, I pray thee, pursue sentence.
A pound of that same merchant's flesh is thine. The court awards it, and the law doth give it.
Most rightful judge.
And you must cut this flesh from off his breast. The court awards it, and the law allows it.
Most learned judge. A sentence. Come. Prepare.
Tarry a little. There is something else. This bond doth give thee here no jot of blood. The words expressly are a pound of flesh. Take then thy bond, take thou thy pound of flesh, but in the cutting it, if thou dost shed one drop of Christian blood, all thy lands and goods are by the laws of Venice confiscate unto the state of Venice.
Is that the law?
Thyself shalt see the act, for as thou urgest justice, be assured thou shalt have justice, more than thou desirest.
I take this offer then. Pay the bond thrice and let the Christian go.
Here is the money.
Soft, the Jew shall have all justice. Soft, no haste. He shall have nothing but the penalty. Therefore prepare thee to cut off the flesh. Shed thou no blood, nor take thou less nor more, but just a pound of flesh. If thou takest more or less than a just pound, be it but so much as makes light or heavy in the substance or the division of the 20th part of one poor scruple, nay, if the scale do turn but in the estimation of a hair, thou diest, and thy lands confiscate. Why does the Jew pause? Take thy forfeiture.
Give me my principal and let me go.
I have it for him. Here it is.
He hath refused it in the open court. He shall have merely justice and his bond.
Shall I not have barely my principal?
Thou shalt have nothing but the forfeiture to be taken at thy own peril, Jew.
Nay then, the devil give him good of it. I'll stay no longer question.
Tarry, Jew. The law hath yet another hold on you. It is enacted in the law of Venice, if it be proved against an alien, that by direct or indirect attempts he seek the life of any citizen, the part against the which he doth contrive shall seize one half his goods, the other half comes to the privy coffer of the state, and the offender's life lies in the mercy of the Duchess only against all other voice. In which predicament I say thou standest, for it appears by manifest proceeding that indirectly and directly too, thou hast contrived against the very life of the defendant, and thou hast incurred the danger formerly by me rehearsed. Down, therefore, and beg mercy of the Duchess.
That thou shalt see the difference of our spirits. I pardon thee thy life before thou ask it. For half thy wealth it is Antonio's. The other half comes to the general state, which humbleness may drive unto a fine.
Aye, for the state, not for Antonio.
Nay, take my life and all, pardon not that. You take my house when you do take the prop that does sustain my house. You take my life when you do take the means whereby I live.
What mercy can you render him, Antonio?
So please the Lady Duchess and all the court to quit the fine for one half of his goods. I am content. So he will let me have the other half in use to render it upon his death unto the gentleman that lately stole his daughter. 2 things provided more, that for this favor he presently become a Christian. The other, that he do record a gift here in the court of all he dies possessed unto his son, Lorenzo, and his daughter.
He shall do this, or else I do recant the pardon that I late pronounced here.
Art thou contented, Jew? What dost thou say?
I am. Content.
Clerk, draw a deed of gift.
I pray you, give me leave to go from hence. I am not well. Send the deed after me, and I will sign
Get
it.
thee gone, but do it.
And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. Please allow us to introduce the esteemed lawyers and judge for our mock trial. The curtain goes up. Song Richardson is Dean of Law at UCI. Her research uses psychology to study criminal procedure, law, and policing. She has received many awards for her scholarship and teaching and was recently nominated for Orange County's Business Journal's Woman of the Year.
And you may have heard of a man named Erwin Chemerinsky. Erwin was the founding dean of UCI's law school. And he is now Dean and Jesse H. Chopper Distinguished Professor of Law at Berkeley Law. He's the author of many books, including Free Speech on Campus with Chancellor Howard Gilman. And so we're thrilled to welcome him back to UCI.
The Honorable Andy Guilford is a judge at the United States District Court. He has received many awards and recognitions and is a frequent contributor to the programs of UCI Law. He will be presiding over today's trial. And I have to say, if we went to central casting, we couldn't have found a better judge for the trial.
Great job.
And now, the Honorable Judge will give you, the jury, instructions on how we will proceed tonight.
Sit here.
Judge?
Sit here.
In the Appellate Court of Venice, we have a very important case. People versus Shylock. We have two distinguished deans and litigants here today. Are you ready to proceed, counsel?
We are, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Have you discussed settlement at all?
We have, Your Honor. And if we could step to the back of the stage to work out the final details.
We think we have reached a settlement, Your Honor. We think there is an appropriate plea bargain, so there will be no need for a trial tonight. Have fun. Unfortunately, no deal, Your Honor.
No.
Ah, that's a relief. So, We do have here the two deans of the two finest public law schools in the United States. And we also have a magnificent jury. Folks, you are the jury. Don't kowtow to the jury over there. I saw that.
Typical of Venice.
Counsel. So, at the end of these proceedings, you will be asked to vote. Let me briefly describe what's going on here. Under the judgment of 1598, the trial court ruled that Shylock's contract was invalid. As a consequence, he was not only owed no additional payment from Antonio, or even the return of his principal, but he would also lose control of his remaining assets, which would go to his daughter and son-in-law at his death. Now, at the end of the proceedings here, you will be asked to vote. If you wish to reverse the judgment against Shylock, you should turn in the blue Shylock card, and that means you are supporting Shylock's appeal. If you wish to affirm the judgment against Shylock, you should turn in the green Portia card, which means you are rejecting Shylock's appeal. And so, counsel, the counsel for the appellant will proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. You ruthless enemy. You inhuman wretch. You disgusting dog. These were the words that were uttered about Shylock and to Shylock in a court of law. The very court that would be ruling on the contract between Shylock and Antonio. Ladies and gentlemen, the entire hearing was a fraud. It was totally illegitimate. Everything about that hearing, including the racism and the anti-Semitism that had haunted Shylock his entire life, had followed him into a court of law. But worse than that, the jurist who presided over that hearing was a cunning, conniving con artist. She disguised herself as a man, pretended to be impartial, pretended to be a jurist, all so that she could help her husband's best friend, Antonio, and orchestrate Shylock's destruction. You cutthroat, dirty dog. This is the type of treatment that Shylock was subjected to each and every day of his life by the Christians of Venice. Every day, when Shylock left the sanctuary of his own home, he had to mentally and physically prepare himself to be kicked, spit upon, insulted, humiliated, and degraded by Christians like Antonio, who hated him simply because he was Jewish. And this cruel and degrading treatment took a toll on Shylock. It chipped away at his dignity, at his self-esteem, and it hurt him so much that he would ask himself, have not a Jew eyes? Has not a Jew organs, senses, hands? If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? He asked himself this every day. because the treatment that he received from those Christian vultures of Venice who would circle him, swoop down and take his flesh little by little every single day of his life, and he never responded. It was dangerous for him to respond, and he needed to support his family. So let's talk about this contract between Shylock and Antonio. The Christians of Venice, they love Antonio because with them, he was kind, he was generous, he was respectful. In a word, he was a gentleman. But Antonio has two faces. The one that he shows his fellow Christians, and then the one he shows to the people who are Jewish, who he despises. And with them, he was cruel and degrading, and Shylock, he was no exception. Antonio had always treated Shylock like dirt, and so Antonio had a problem. Because Antonio's best friend, Bassanio, needed to borrow some money in order to court the very wealthy Portia. You'll hear more about her in a moment. And Antonio, of course, wanted to help his fellow Christian. The problem was, even though he was the merchant of Venice, even though he was extremely wealthy, all of his wealth was temporarily unavailable. So he needed a favor from Shylock. He needed to borrow money from Shylock. So you might think that for once in his life, Antonio would apologize. That Antonio would say, Shylock, I'm so sorry for laughing at your losses, for kicking you, for degrading you, for insulting you, for humiliating you. I am so sorry. I will not do that again. But of course, Antonio couldn't bring himself to do it. Even when he needed a favor, he could not show any grace or any mercy to Shylock. So if you were Shylock then, what would you do? Would you loan Antonio the money? Well, Shylock had strength at that point. He had the strength of his family who helped him overcome all of the vultures of Venice who would pick away at his flesh every single day. He showed mercy and grace to Antonio by agreeing to lend him the money. And not only that, Shylock also said to Antonio, I won't charge you any interest. And why is that so important? Because charging interest was the only way Shylock could make a living. Charging interest was one of the reasons the Christians of Venice, those vultures, hated Shylock so much. They didn't care that he couldn't make a living without charging interest, but this time Shylock said to Antonio, I'm giving you an interest-free loan. And then they both agreed that instead of interest, should Antonio be unable to pay back the loan in 3 months, Antonio would owe Shylock a pound of his flesh. I know that sounds shocking. But remember this. This was a contract. This was a negotiated contract by the more powerful person, the more privileged person, Antonio, with Shylock. This wasn't some secret clause written in a dirty, dark back room. They agreed to it. Antonio agreed to this. He was happy with this contract. How do we know that? Because once he signed that contract, he said to Shylock, Shylock, you're being kind. And then later, when he left with his friend, he said to his friend, that Jew is turning Christian. He's being kind. So let's not ever question the fairness of that bargain. Antonio thought it was fair. He liked it. He agreed with it. But not only that, as I mentioned before, Antonio is the merchant of Venice. He is extremely wealthy, and his wealth was only temporarily unavailable. No one believed that Shylock or that Antonio would not be able to pay this loan back. Antonio and Shylock both believed that within 3 months, Antonio temporarily would be able to get his wealth back and pay Shylock back. And finally, please remember when you think about this particular contract, remember that for Shylock, it was dangerous for him. It was dangerous for him to speak out against a Christian. So the only way that he could register how angry he was, how hurt he was, the only way he could say to Antonio, "What you have done to me my entire life is wrong. You Christians of Venice have picked away my flesh, my flesh, my entire life." He was registering his hurt, his despair in this contract. Let's never question the fairness of this contract, the one that Antonio, the privileged and powerful party, signed. Not under duress, not because someone was forcing him to, but because it was to his benefit. So what happened then when the contract came due? Remarkably, Antonio couldn't pay the contract back, and Shylock, he was a broken man. His wife, his beloved wife, was dead. The only family that Shylock had left was his daughter, Jessica. He had brought Jessica into the world. He loved Jessica. He trusted her. He treasured her. Jessica, his daughter, was his heart. She's the one who gave him strength every day when he had to deal with these Christian vultures. But Jessica was gone. She had run away with a Christian. And not only that, she was planning to convert to Christianity. Her betrayal was unexpected and devastating. Shylock had no strength left. He went to his home and he searched desperately for the one physical memento of his wife he had left, the ring that she had given him before she died. He searched everywhere for that, to give him comfort, to give him strength, and he couldn't find it anywhere. And that's when he realized and learned that his daughter had stolen that ring, not for sentimental reasons, but to sell it for money. If mercy is the strongest in the strongest people, Shylock had no strength left. He was a broken man. He didn't have strength to show mercy to anyone, let alone the man who had never, ever shown him any mercy.
3 minutes, counsel.
So what happened then at the hearing on the contract? You saw some of it. You saw the way that they insulted Shylock before he ever got into that courtroom. And what you didn't see was the number of Christians of Venice who were in that courtroom too. And they insulted Shylock before the hearing ever began. And then when Shylock walked in, they called him once again a disgusting dog. They said to him, and you didn't hear this part, they said to Shylock, "It would be justice for you to be killed." It would be justice for you to be killed. And they weren't done yet, because in this court of law, they also said to him, "Your mom's womb is unholy. Your mom's womb is unholy because it gave birth to you." Nobody rose to Shylock's defense. No one said, this is inappropriate in a court of law. Shylock was used to it. All he wanted to do was to enforce the valid, lawful contract he had with Antonio, the contract both of them had negotiated in good faith, the contract that Antonio signed because it was to his benefit, the contract that they both believed was lawful, and then the Duchess told him was lawful, and then this brilliant young jurist walks into the courtroom and tells Shylock the contract is lawful too. What no one in that courtroom knew, but what you know, is that this jurist wasn't a jurist at all. This jurist was a cunning, conniving con woman. This jurist, all she wanted to do was help her husband's best friend, Antonio, and orchestrate Shylock's destruction, but she couldn't do any of this if anyone knew who she was. So what did she do? She convinced her cousin to lie. Her cousin was actually a respected jurist. She convinced him, because that's how cunning and conniving she is, she convinced him to write a letter to the court describing her as a brilliant young jurist who was completely familiar with the case and had already formed an opinion about it. And then she walked in and she says to Shylock, and you didn't see this part either, she asks Shylock to show mercy, but then she tells him 4 times that it is lawful for him to enforce this contract, that there are no negative consequences to him enforcing this contract, and Shylock put his faith in the law. It is all he had. Because when the rest of society is anti-Semitic and racist, the law, he believes, is all he had. He put his faith in that jurist and he said, I want to enforce my contract.
We're now in rebuttal time, counsel.
And only then, after she had set this trap, she waited for this Jew, this wretch, this cutthroat dog to fall for her trap, and he did. And how do we know it's a trap? Because she could have told him everything at the beginning. She could have said, Shylock, show mercy, but if you insist on enforcing this contract, you will lose everything. So then you decide, Shylock. But she didn't tell him that. She didn't tell him that till the end. So she speaks eloquently of mercy, but then she rendered him none. And what did Shylock do to deserve this? He had the gall, the temerity. This Jew had the temerity to stand up to a Christian in a Christian court. That's all that he had done. I'm not done. I may not have rebuttal time left.
Thank you.
I'm not done yet. I love a Caesar salad. Love it. I have ordered Caesar salads at restaurants. Oh, look at how Portia's reacting. I love these I love the tangy dressing, the lettuce, all of it. So I was at a restaurant getting ready to dig into the salad. I love to eat. And then I saw something dirty, disgusting, slimy. So I call the waiter over and I ask him to help me with the salad. And he says, don't worry, miss, I can fix it. So he pulls out the cockroach and he sets it aside. And he says, now you can eat the salad. Of course I couldn't. That cockroach had contaminated the entire thing in exactly the way that Portia's deceit and the anti-Semitism and the racism of that hearing contaminated the whole thing. So don't let the state convince you to ignore that. Reverse the judgment, give Shylock the money he is owed, and give Shylock his life back. Thank you.
Before we proceed further,
Thank you, counsel.
counsel, is the knife in question in the courtroom?
It is,
Thank you. You may proceed.
Your Honor.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Judge Guilford, it's an honor and great pleasure to appear before you. It is wonderful to be back at UCI. And it's always terrific to be with my esteemed colleague and dear friend, Song Richardson. I have enormous regard for Song as a dean, as a scholar, as a teacher, as an advocate. But at last tonight, she is just wrong. And she may have sounded persuasive, but here I would remind you of what Shakespeare said in none other than The Merchant of Venice: all that glitters is not gold. Indeed, as you reflect on it, I think you will see that the quality of the defense arguments are strained. I first read The Merchant of Venice when I was in high school, and I was deeply disturbed by it. I'm Jewish. I wanted to know, why did Shakespeare make the villain in The Merchant of Venice a Jew? And why did Shakespeare play on the worst stereotypes about Jews? I think there can be no doubt that Shylock is the villain in The Merchant of Venice. He enters into a contract with Antonio out of revenge, with the desire to maim and likely take Antonio's life. When there's the opportunity for Shylock to show mercy, he demonstrates none. And as we'll talk about in Act 4, Shylock is sharpening his knife to maim, to take Antonio's life. Lest you have any doubt whether we should regard Shylock as the virtuous individual, the victim, or the villain, ask yourself the following question. Before coming in tonight, if you had heard somebody referred to, especially a lawyer called a Shylock, would you have thought of that as being a compliment or an insult? And it does play on the worst stereotypes of Jews. Since the Middle Ages, Jews have been portrayed as unscrupulous moneylenders. There's a reason why Hitler and the Nazis, repeatedly in Germany, showed the play The Merchant of Venice as propaganda. And it wasn't because they regarded Shylock as a virtuous individual. I think what we see in The Merchant of Venice is something we see across the world today. There were few Jews in England at the time Shakespeare wrote this play. The Edict of 1290 in England expelled the Jews. Jews did not return to England until the 17th century. There were Jews in Venice, but anti-Semitism was virulent. Jews in Venice had to wear red hats. They had to live in a ghetto. They were guarded by Christian soldiers. Today, too, across the world, in countries where there are few Jews, we see Jews turned into scapegoats. Think of Poland, Hungary, Malaysia, and the anti-Semitism there. And yet tonight, we have to set all of that aside. Tonight, what we have to do is ask, if Shylock committed these acts today in California, would we find him blameless or blameworthy? We are to take Shakespeare's play, The Merchant of Venice, and apply the law of California to it. Judge Guilford read the instructions that you're to answer, and they are to shape all of our discussion tonight. I remind you of what they say. The instructions that are the third page of your brochure say the court ruled that Shylock's contract was invalid. As a consequence, he was not only owed no additional payment from Antonio, or even the return of his principal, but he'd also lose control of his remaining assets, which was daughter and son-in-law at his death. So I think what that tells you is there are two, and only two questions for you as a jury. First, should Shylock's contract with Antonio be enforced? And second, did Shylock commit a crime for which he should be punished? Now, this is an unusual procedural posture. The first of these questions would usually be regarded as a civil law question, and that is is the contract enforceable? And the second, the punishment that's imposed goes to whether there was a crime. But I think as you reflect on the text of the Merchant of Venice, the answer to each of these questions is quite clear. Focus on the first question. Should Shylock's contract with Antonio be enforced? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, no court in this country would enforce a contract like that. This is a contract that calls for the maiming and likely death of an individual. It is a contract that any court in the country would say was against public policy. Now, it's clear that Shylock entered into this country out of his own hatred for Antonio and his desire for revenge. Shylock did not have the money to loan to Antonio. Shylock had to borrow the money to be able to make the loan. And Shylock tells us in the text why he did this. Shylock says, and I quote to you from Act 1, "I hate him, for he is a Christian. If I can catch him once upon the hip, I would feed fat the ancient grudge I bear him." Shylock says at another point, Act 1, "I hate him, for he's a Christian, but more for that in low simplicity. He lends out money gratis and brings down the rate of usage, interest, here in Venice." At trial, Shylock says, and once more I quote this time from Act 4, that what he was doing was, quote, "lodged in hate and a certain loathing." So Shylock, out of hatred, decides to enter into a contract that he thinks is going to cause the maiming and death of Antonio. Is such a contract enforceable in the law? Clearly, absolutely not. California Civil Code section 1668 says, and I will quote it for you, that a contract that calls for injury or death is unenforceable. California Code 1668. For after all, this is a court of law, and you as the jury are to enforce the law. This provision says, quote, "All contracts which have for their object, directly or indirectly, to willfully injure the property or person of another are a violation of the law, and whether willful or negligent, are against the policy of the law and are unenforceable." Any contract that calls for the willful injury of another is an unenforceable contract. And indeed, in Neubauer versus Goldfarb, the California Court of Appeals said, any contract whose terms would call for the injury of another is against public policy, it's not enforceable. And so the first question that you have to face as a jury, is this contract enforceable? The answer is clearly no. So what does the prosecutor here, or what does the defense counsel, Shylock's attorney, tell you here? Well, she says, Antonio was horrible to Shylock. That's unquestionably true, but it doesn't make the contract here enforceable. She said, Shylock was doing a favor to Antonio, a favor of luring him to a contract that would lead to his maiming and likely death. Hardly a favor at all. As I said, it wasn't a favor. It was done out of a desire for maiming and death. It was done out of hatred. And then Dean Richardson says, well, but Antonio agreed to the contract. Yes, it was a willful bargain, but in the law, certain contracts are not enforceable. A contract where a person sells himself or herself into slavery, a contract that would result in a person being maimed, a person being injured, is unenforceable, even if it's voluntarily entered into. So the first question has a clear answer. The contract is not enforceable. What about the second question? Was a crime committed by Shylock a crime that deserves a punishment? And here, too, the answer is clear. The law says that a threat against another person is a crime. And here, too, the law is clear. It says that it is an illegal threat if it would cause a reasonable person to fear for his or her physical safety. Easy example. Imagine a student is walking across this campus, and an angry group surrounds the student. And the angry group yells at the student in a way that causes the student to fear being beaten. Even if no blow is struck, that group has committed a crime against the student. They've committed the illegal act of a threat. They've caused that student to reasonably fear for his or her physical safety. And there can be no doubt that this play, that's exactly what Shylock did. Shylock went to court to say that what he wanted was a judgment that would lead to the maiming and likely the death of Antonio. In Act 4 of the play, Shylock takes this knife and sharpens this knife, indicating he wishes to use it to maim, to kill Antonio. There's no doubt here that Shylock had full intention of using that knife, and at the very least that Antonio had to fear it. Let me read you from Act 4, Scene 1. Bassiano says, "Why dost thou whet thy knife so earnestly? Shylock, to cut the forfeiture from the bankrupt there. Gratiano, not on thy soul, but on thy soul, harsh Jew. Thou makest this knife keen, but no metal can, no, not the hangman's ask, bear half the keenness of thy sharp envy. Can no pierce thee? Shylock, no, none. Thou hast wit enough to make." Shylock says to Portia, "Most learned judge, a sentence, come prepare." And when there are plays or movies that show the Merchant of Venice, it's at this point that Shylock puts the knife to Antonio's threat. That is a threat. That is a sufficient basis for criminal punishment. Now, what arguments does Song Richardson make on the other side? One thing she says is Shylock was subject to terrible anti-Semitism. That's, of course, true. It's one of the horrible things about this play. But it doesn't justify a contract that can't be enforced, and it doesn't justify making a threat against the life of another. She here tries to say that Shylock was actually a sympathetic figure. And she quotes a very famous passage where Shylock says, "If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do not die." But here, Dean Richardson stops too soon. She doesn't read you what comes after this in the text. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when we just... Never mind, different play. Here is what Shylock says next. "If we are like you in the rest, we will resemble you in that. If a Jew wrong a Christian, what is his humility? Revenge. If a Christian wrong a Jew, what should his sufferance by a Christian example? Why revenge? The villainy you teach me I will execute, and it shall go hard, but I will better the instruction." Portia gave Shylock the chance to show mercy, but repeatedly Shylock refused to do so. Shylock was out for revenge, out for maiming, out for murder, and that's a crime under the law. Now, Dean Richardson says at some length that the hearing was a fraud, that Portia was biased because of anti-Semitism out of personal gain. A couple of things here. First, that's not the issue before you tonight. Portia's not on trial. There are only two questions before you tonight. First, is the contract enforceable? And second, did Shylock commit a crime for which he should be punished? Second, here, Portia actually spared Shylock's life. Under the laws of Venice at the time, what Shylock was doing was a crime punishable by death. In the United States, here in California, the crime of a threat could be punished by imprisonment. Portia doesn't impose those sentences on Shylock. In fact, Portia doesn't even take Shylock's property away from him permanently. He doesn't get control, but it will go on to his daughter and his son-in-law. So the punishment is a relatively minimal one compared to one that could be imposed in Venice or in these times. She says, Shylock put his faith in the law. But here, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what I would say is the law saved Shylock's life. What Shylock did in this play was wrong. And even though Shylock had been subjected to anti-Semitism, responding to anti-Semitism or racism or other injustices cannot be done by committing crimes. It cannot be done as was done here, by putting a person's life in danger. And so, if you look past the glitter, what you see is that Shylock here entered a contract that no court would enforce. Shylock committed a crime of threatening Antonio, and there's only one possible verdict: lock him up.
Don't listen to it.
Counsel, you have 2 minutes in rebuttal.
Thank you. It's all well and good that counsel would like to rely on California law to take your attention away from the anti-Semitic laws that applied at that hearing below, the one that would only punish you if you spilled a drop of Christian blood, or if you directly or indirectly threatened the life of a Christian. But those weren't the laws that applied. And despite everything learned counsel says, because we agree on a lot, let's not enforce this contract. Let's not let Antonio walk away scot-free with all of Shylock's money, because that's what happened. They forced Shylock to convert to Christianity. The state is saying that is not right. But if this contract is invalid, let's bring Shylock back to where he was before all of this started. That's what I'm asking you to do. Reject that judgment, make Shylock whole, because that hearing was illegitimate. There is no world in which, let's take what counsel did and apply it this way. Imagine you walked into a court in Santa Ana, California, and imagine you had an African-American defendant, everyone else in the courtroom was white, and every single one called the defendant the N-word. Every single one said, basically, apply the racism that has existed in this entire city against him. And let's bring in a jurist who's not really a jurist, which is a crime, by the way. And it's interesting that the two people who are sitting at the state's table are not being charged with crimes. Impersonating a lawyer, pretending to be a lawyer, is a crime. Assaulting, kicking someone, spitting on them is called assault. Why are they sitting at counsel table? They should be in jail, too.
Thank you, counsel. Please conclude.
And I will conclude by saying, if this is attempted murder, then there is a remedy for that. Let's reject the contract, make Shylock whole, and have a new legitimate trial with a real judge in a courtroom that is not messed up with anti-Semitism and racism. But all I'm asking you today is not to eat that disgusting, dirty, illegitimate salad and give Shylock his life back. Thank you.
Dean Chemerinsky.
We could do this all night.
I want to focus your attention on the question that you have to answer. And I want to take it step by step. Again, this is page 3 of your program. The court ruled that Shylock's contract was invalid. As a consequence, he was not only owed no additional payment to Antonio, even return of his principal. Stop there. That's the first question. Should Shylock's contract with Antonio be enforced? I say to you, no court in the country would have enforced Shylock's contract with Antonio because it's against public policy. I said that no court will enforce a contract that calls for the injury or death of another person. What does Dean Richardson say about that? Nothing. The law is clear that the contract can't be enforced. In fact, the law on this was clear in England at the time of Shakespeare, in Italy. No contract's going to be enforced that leads to the injury or death of another. Well, then you get to the second part of the instructions, but he'd also lose control of his remaining assets, which go to his daughter and son-in-law at his death. This is a criminal punishment. It wouldn't be imposed for breach of contract. It would be for a crime. And I said, here the question is, has Shylock committed a crime? And I said, at the very least, he's committed the crime of threatening the life of Antonio. It is a crime to make a threat it would cause a reasonable person to fear for danger to his or her safety. And I read to you from Act 4, where Shylock is sharpening his knife, and talk about how in the plays and in the movies, this is the point where Shylock actually takes the knife to Antonio's neck. I read to you of how Shylock is given the opportunity to show mercy, and he refuses to do so. And from the text, there's no doubt that that's a crime. What does Dean Richardson say about that? Absolutely nothing. So what does she say? She says, first, that I was wrong to say that this was under California law. Now, I think you're a jury in California. You have to apply California law. I don't think that either Dean Richardson or I are experts on the law of Venice at this time. But I'd venture to say that under the laws of Venice or of any jurisdiction, this wouldn't have been an enforceable contract, and this would have been a crime. She then brings up that Shylock is forced to convert to Christianity, something we haven't discussed, and something that's very disturbing in the play. And I think here you see the anti-Semitism of the Merchant of Venice. What does it mean that Shylock was ordered to convert to Christianity? It was likely at the time perceived as it was doing a great favor to Shylock, because by becoming a Christian, he would be given eternal salvation. Now, we should condemn that anti-Semitism, but it doesn't go to the question of whether there's a crime. But most of all, what Dean Richardson wants to tell us tonight is that this was a biased jury and a biased judge. But that's not the issue that's before you. You're not asked to evaluate whether or not the jury was biased. You're not asked to evaluate whether Portia was biased. You're asked to answer two questions. Is this contract enforceable, and did Shylock commit a crime? You're asked to enforce that for yourself. And as I said to you, for all of the claims of Portia being biased, Portia actually saved Shylock's life. That under the law of Venice that existed at the time, Shylock could have been killed. Rather than doing that, rather than even taking Shylock's property away from him permanently, all that Portia does is say, this contract can't be enforced, and the property will go to your daughter and your son-in-law. A very minimal punishment. We cannot ignore the anti-Semitism of this play. We can't ignore the racism of society. But that's not your task tonight. Your task tonight is to look at the text of The Merchant of Venice and answer two questions. Is this contract enforceable? And did Shylock commit a crime? Because the answer to both of those questions is clear. The obvious verdict is guilty. Turn in the card, not for Shylock, but for Portia. Thank you again.
Thank you for that very enlightening argument, counsel. And now, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it is up to you. I will repeat the instructions, and you may then follow them and pass your card to the center aisle. To reverse the judgment against Shylock, turn in the blue Shylock card. You would be supporting Shylock's appeal. To affirm the judgment against Shylock, turn in the green Portia card. You are rejecting Shylock's appeal. And then pass the cards to your nearest aisle. They will be gathered, a count will be made, and the result will be announced to you. The matter is submitted.
Wow.
Okay, good. So
That was good. I want to get up again and do it.
while you are passing your cards to the aisles and we're collecting
Do
them,
this in a theater where you can't see the.
You like that? Very good. I've thought a lot about this play, but I got a lot more to think about. Yeah. Feel free. Come talk to me. Well, you know, some of us say lawyering is just acting. I've been accused by juries of.
Entertainment for you tonight from our production of The Merchant of Venice. We're going to present for you 3 very short selections, during which time we hope we can get the cards counted. And the first scene that we're going to present for you is a scene between Shylock and Antonio. This is from Act 1, Scene 2, where Antonio encounters Shylock and asks him for the loan of 3,000 ducats.
Shylock, although I neither lend nor borrow by taking nor by giving of excess, yet to supply the ripe wants of my friend, I'll break a custom. Are you yet possessed how much he would?
Aye, 3,000 ducats.
And for 3 months?
I had forgot. 3 months. Well then, your bond. Then let me see. But hear you, methought you said you neither lend nor borrow upon advantage.
I do never use it.
When Jacob grazed his uncle Laban's sheep, this Jacob from our holy Abram was.
And what of him? Did he take interest?
No, not take interest. Not as you would say, directly interest. Mark you what Jacob did.
Mark you this. The devil can cite scripture for his purpose. An evil soul producing holy witness is like a villain with a smiling cheek. A goodly apple rotten at the heart. What a goodly outside falsehood hath.
3,000 ducats. 'Tis a good round sum. 3 months from 12. And let me see the rate.
Well, Shylock, shall we be beholden to you?
Signor Antonio, many a time and oft in the Rialto you have rated me about my monies and my usances. Still have I borne it with a patient shrug, for sufferance is the badge of all our tribe. You call me misbeliever, cutthroat, dog, and spit upon my Jewish gabardine, and all for use of that which is mine own. Well, it now appears you need my help. Go to then, you come to me, and you say, Shylock, we would have monies. You say so. You, that did void your room upon my beard, and foot me as you spurn a stranger cur over your threshold. Monies is your suit. What should I say to you? Should I not say, hath a dog money? Is it possible a cur can lend 3,000 ducats? Or shall I bid low and in a bondman's key with bated breath and whispering humbleness say this, fair sir, you spit on me Wednesday last, you spurned me such a day, another day you call me dog, and for these courtesies I'll lend you thus much money.
I am as like to call thee so again. to spit on thee again, to spurn thee. 2, if thou wilt lend this money, lend it not as to thy friend, for when his friendship take a breed for barren metal of his friend, but lend it rather to thine enemy, who if he breaks, thou mayst with better face exact the penalty.
Look you how you storm. I would be friends with you and have your love. Forget the shames you have stained me with, supply your present wants, and take no doit of usance for my monies, and you'll not hear me. This is kind I offer.
Well, you've heard most of the next speech that we're going to bring forward for you, but this is Portia's famous speech from the trial scene, the Quality of Mercy speech.
The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes a throned monarch better than his crown. His scepter shows the force of temporal power, the attribute to awe and majesty, wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings, but mercy is above the sceptered sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to God himself. And earthly power doth then show like his gods when mercy seasons justice. Therefore, Jew, though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice, none of us should see salvation. We do pray for mercy. And that same prayer doth teach us all to render the deeds of mercy. I have spoken thus much to mitigate the justice of thy plea, which if thou follow, this strict court of Venice must needs give sentence against the merchant there. Well done.
And we have one last scene from the play for you.
Why, I'm sure if thou forfeit, thou wilt not take his flesh. What's that good for?
To bait fish withal. If it will feed nothing else, it will feed my revenge. He hath disgraced me and hindered me 500,000, laughed at my losses, mocked at my gains, scorned my nation, thwarted my bargains, cooled my friends, heated mine enemies. And what's his reason? I am a Jew. Hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions? Fed with the same food, hurt by the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is. If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? If we are like you in the rest, we will resemble you in that. If a Jew wrong a Christian, what is his humility? Why, revenge. If a Christian wrong a Jew, what should his sufferance be? By Christian example, why? revenge, the villainy you teach me, I will execute, and it shall go hard, but I will better the instruction.
Bailiff Lupton is presenting the judge with the tally.
The parties will stand. The vote is as follows: 210 for the green Porsche card, 408 for the blue Shylock. Zot! Oh, here we go. We're in recess. Thank you. I love the play. I love working with you. Okay.
And there you have it. Thank you so much for coming to our mock trial tonight. We really do appreciate your support so much. I think we have lemonade and cookies out in the lobby, and we invite you to join us there for that. We want to thank all of our participants and actors tonight, and another round of applause. Especially Song and Erwin and Andy, we really appreciate it. And I think this is a good time to let you know that this coming summer at New Swan, we will be producing Julius Caesar and The Comedy of Errors. So those are our two shows for this coming season. Thank you again so much for coming, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.